In the small village of Hollowbrook, there was an old woman named Marla, feared by all who lived there. Marla lived in a crumbling house at the edge of the forest, where thick, twisted trees grew like black veins around her home. Her only companion was a single-eyed cat named Grim, a creature with sleek, shadowy fur and a glistening yellow eye that seemed to pierce through the darkness. Marla rarely spoke to anyone. Those who dared wander too close to her house whispered of strange sounds that floated on the wind, a low hum of chanting, or the growl of Grim's voice-like purr. Children dared each other to throw stones at her house, but most wouldn't get within 100 yards of it. They said Marla was a witch, that Grim wasn't a cat but a demon in disguise. Years passed, and the village was plagued by strange misfortunes. Cattle disappeared, crops withered, and the trees in the woods seemed to draw nearer to the village each night, inch by inch. Only Marla's house remained untouched by the rot that spread across Hollowbrook. Then came the screams. It began with a child who went missing one stormy night. His cries were heard echoing through the woods, trailing off toward Marla's house, but no one was brave enough to follow. A few days later, a local butcher vanished, leaving only a blood-stained apron in his kitchen. The townsfolk were terrified. They spoke of curses and strange magic, and always they mentioned the old woman and her one-eyed cat. One bitter evening, the townspeople decided to confront Marla. They gathered torches and pitchforks, their faces grim and determined. As they marched toward her house, they noticed Grim watching them from the porch, his single eye glowing like molten gold. Marla stepped out, wearing a faded black dress, her grey hair wild and unkempt, her face hidden in shadow. "Leave now," she said in a raspy voice. "Leave before you find what you cannot understand." But they didn't leave. They demanded answers, shaking their fists and shouting. Marla's face twisted into a smile, and she raised a bony finger pointing to the woods behind them. "If you seek the truth," she whispered, "look there." The villagers hesitated, but eventually a few brave souls moved into the trees, driven by curiosity and fear. They vanished into the dark woods, while the others waited outside Marla's house, tense and silent. Hours passed, and dawn began to break, casting a pale light across the village. Finally, the search party returned, their faces pale and blank. They carried no words with them, only fear, deep and silent. They wouldn't speak of what they'd seen, but they left Marla and her cat alone after that. One chilly autumn night, young Emily, the baker's daughter, decided to venture to Marla's house. She had seen Grim one too many times, always watching her, and curiosity had hooked its claws deep in her mind. She waited until the moon was full and shining bright, then crept out while her family slept. She found Grim waiting for her on the steps, his single eye fixed on her. The cat turned, padding softly into the house, and Emily followed. Marla was sitting by the fireplace, her back turned, murmuring to herself in a strange language. Emily's heart pounded as she stepped closer. The room was lined with strange jars and bottles, filled with dark liquids and shadowy shapes. The air was thick and cold. Suddenly Marla stopped speaking, her head turning slowly toward Emily. "Why are you here, child?" Marla asked, her voice hollow. "I want to know what you've done to them," Emily said, her voice barely a whisper. "To the ones who vanished." Marla chuckled, a dry, croaking sound. She gestured to Grim, who jumped into her lap and stared at Emily with that single, unblinking eye. "Do you really want to know?" Marla asked, her smile widening until it was almost too large for her face. Emily nodded, her fists clenched. Marla reached out and touched the cat's forehead. Slowly, Grim began to change. His fur peeled back and his body stretched, twisting and warping until he was no longer a cat. He was a hunched, monstrous figure. A man with one sunken eye in the centre of his face and twisted limbs that seemed to wriggle like worms. He grinned at Emily, his teeth too sharp, too white. "Meet Grim," Marla said softly. "My husband." Emily's eyes widened as she took a step back, the truth sinking into her like ice. Every missing person in the village, every last one of them, was trapped inside Grim. She could see them now, their faces faintly etched into his skin, their eyes wide and mouths frozen in silent screams. "No!" Emily gasped, stumbling toward the door, but it was too late. Grim's shadow stretched, swallowing her in one swift, smooth motion. The room went dark, and Marla's laughter echoed like a breaking mirror. The next morning, Marla's house was empty. She and Grim had vanished without a trace. The townsfolk searched, but there was no sign of the old woman or the girl. Only the sound of a cat's soft, mocking purr drifted through the village at night. Years later, a new family moved into Hollowbrook, unaware of its dark history. They found a stray one-eyed cat lurking by the edge of the woods and took it in, not knowing that when the moon was full, the cat would sit at the window and watch them, its single eye glowing with a cold, hungry light. They named the cat Chill, and the disappearances began again.